Hey everybody, it's Fearless Gamer Girl here, and today I'll be talking about scientists are building computers with living human brain cells. Let's get into it. Imagine sitting in front of a computer and watching someone play a video game. The character moves, the player reacts, the game responds, everything looks normal, except there is no person holding the controller. There isn't even a normal AI controlling everything. Instead, part of the system is made from living human brain cells, and those cells are connected directly to a computer. This sounds like something from a science fiction movie, but researchers are already experimenting with technology like this. They are growing neurons in laboratories, connecting those neurons to electronic systems, and studying whether living cells can learn to respond to digital environments. Some experiments have involved simple games, others are pushing towards something much bigger. Scientists want to understand whether biology could someday become part of computing itself. And there is a major reason researchers are interested in this idea: power. The energy problem. Artificial intelligence is becoming incredibly powerful, but powerful AI requires enormous amounts of computing equipment. Those computers require electricity, a lot of electricity. Modern data centers can contain thousands of powerful processors running around the clock. Every time AI becomes larger and more complicated, companies need more computing power to train and operate those systems. That creates a problem. We can build better computer chips, we can build bigger data centers, but producing enough electricity for everything isn't nearly as simple. Technology companies are already searching for new sources of energy. Some are investing in nuclear power, others are signing long-term energy agreements, and billions of dollars are being spent building infrastructure around AI. But researchers noticed something interesting. Nature already created an incredibly powerful information processing machine: the human brain. Think about everything your brain is doing right now. You can see, you can hear, you can remember things, you can recognize faces, you can understand these words, you can make decisions, you can learn something new, and somehow your brain performs all of these jobs using roughly the amount of electricity needed by a small household light bulb. That's incredible. Meanwhile, modern computers can require enormous amounts of electricity to perform certain AI tasks. So researchers started asking a strange question. Instead of constantly trying to make computer chips behave more like brains, then what if we actually used brain cells? Teaching living cells. This idea didn't suddenly appear overnight. Scientists have experimented with connecting living neurons to machines for years. One important question was whether neurons could actually interact with an electronic system in a meaningful way. Researchers could grow neurons on surfaces containing tiny electrodes. Those electrodes could detect electrical activity coming from the cells. The computer could then translate those signals into commands. It could also send signals back. That created something like a conversation between biology and electronics. The machine sends information to the neurons. The neurons respond. The machine reads that response. Then the process happens again. Early experiments were simple. Researchers even connected neurons to small robotic systems. But there was an obvious problem. Were the neurons actually controlling anything? Or were computers simply interpreting random electrical activity and making it appear meaningful? Scientists needed better experiments. And another discovery helped move everything forward. Researchers learned how to take ordinary adult cells and return them to a state where they could eventually become other kinds of cells. That meant scientists didn't necessarily need to remove neurons directly from someone's brain. They could potentially start with something much simpler, like skin cells. Those cells could be changed and eventually developed into neurons. Suddenly, scientists had another way of producing human neurons for laboratory research. But there was another important discovery. When neurons grow across a flat laboratory dish, their organization is limited. When researchers allow certain cells to grow in 3 dimensions, something very different can happen. They can begin organizing themselves into tiny structures. These structures are commonly called organoids. They aren't tiny people, they aren't complete brains. But they can give scientists models that behave more like biological tissue than traditional flat cell cultures. Researchers can use organoids to study development and disease. But some scientists began wondering whether living neural tissue could do something else. Could it process information? Could it learn? Dish brain. In 2022, researchers connected hundreds of thousands of neurons to an electronic system. The project became known as Dish Brain, and researchers used it in an experiment involving the classic game Pong. Pong is incredibly simple. There is a paddle, there is a ball, and the goal is basically to keep the ball from getting past the paddle. That simplicity made it useful for an experiment. Researchers could translate information from the game into electrical signals. Those signals could be sent to the neurons. Then the electrical activity produced by the neurons could be interpreted by the computer. The system created a feedback loop. Game sends information, cells respond, computer reads the response, game changes, then everything repeats. But scientists still needed some way for the cells to improve. You can't explain the rules of Pong to a dish of neurons. You can't tell them, "Great job," and you definitely can't hand them a trophy. So researchers used electrical feedback. When the system produced a better result, the neurons received more predictable signals. When things went badly, the electrical feedback became less predictable. The basic idea was that biological systems tend to respond to changes in their environment and may adjust their behavior. Over time, researchers reported changes suggesting that the network was responding to the feedback. That immediately created headlines. People started saying brain cells learned to play Pong. That sounds unbelievable, but the reality was more complicated. The neurons didn't understand Pong the way you understand a video game. They didn't know there was a paddle. They didn't know there was a score. They didn't know they were inside an experiment. Researchers were translating the digital world into electrical signals that the cells could respond to. Still, something important appeared to be happening. Living neurons were interacting with a digital system, and that was enough to make researchers wonder how far this could go. From Pong to DOOM. Eventually, the experiments became even more dramatic. Researchers and developers began demonstrating living neural systems interacting with DOOM. DOOM is much more complicated than Pong. Instead of moving one paddle, the player moves through a three-dimensional environment. There are walls, enemies, weapons, movement, damage, different directions, and many more decisions. A system involving roughly 200,000 human neurons was connected to a computer interface. The neurons were grown from cells that had been changed into neurons and placed across electrodes. The computer could send information to the cells. Then it could read electrical activity coming back. Those signals were connected to actions inside the game: movement, turning, shooting. But here's something extremely important. The neurons weren't doing everything. A normal computer was still handling major parts of the system. Software had to understand what was happening inside the game. It had to translate information. It had to decide how signals would be sent. And it had to translate neural activity back into commands. So saying, "A human brain is playing DOOM" would be misleading. There isn't a complete brain sitting inside the computer, and there isn't evidence that a tiny person is trapped inside playing a video game. Instead, this is a hybrid system. Part normal computer, part software, part living neurons. But researchers wanted to know whether those neurons were actually contributing anything. One way to test that is surprisingly simple. Replace the neurons. If the biological cells aren't important, then random signals should work just as well. But according to the material surrounding these demonstrations, when biological activity was replaced with random noise, the learning behavior stopped. That suggests the neurons were contributing something meaningful to the system. Maybe not everything, maybe not even most of the intelligence, but something. And that's where this story becomes much more interesting. Because the goal isn't necessarily to build a gaming computer out of brain cells. DOOM is a demonstration. The bigger question is what happens when biological computing becomes more advanced. Why would anyone want this?
There are several possible reasons. One is energy efficiency. Biological brains are incredibly efficient compared with many modern computing systems. If researchers could understand how to use biological neural networks for certain computing tasks, future systems might perform some operations while consuming much less electricity. Imagine combining traditional computer processors with biological components. The silicon processor handles one type of job. The biological network handles another. Instead of replacing computers completely, biology could become another type of processor. There are already companies exploring versions of this idea. One example is a Swiss company called Final Spark. Its platform allows researchers to remotely experiment with living neurons through the internet. Think about how strange that sentence would have sounded 20 years ago. A researcher can sit somewhere else in the world, connect through the internet, and perform experiments involving living neural tissue located inside a laboratory. This area is sometimes discussed under terms such as biological computing or organoid intelligence. And if the technology works, it can have uses far beyond AI. Scientists could create better models for studying brain diseases. Instead of testing everything on animals, researchers could potentially study treatments using human-derived neural tissue.
They could observe how certain cells react. They could test medicines. They could study neurological conditions. They might eventually understand parts of the human brain that are extremely difficult to study today. Those benefits could be enormous. But there's another side to this story, and it's the reason these experiments create such uncomfortable questions. Can the cells feel anything? When people first hear about living neurons playing a video game, one question usually appears almost immediately. Are they conscious? Right now, there is no good evidence showing that these cell cultures are conscious like a human being. They don't have complete brains, they don't have bodies, they don't have eyes, they don't have ears, they don't understand doom. But consciousness itself remains incredibly difficult to explain. Scientists can measure electrical activity, they can observe behavior, they can study individual neurons, they can scan the brain. But explaining exactly why biological activity produces a personal experience is much harder. You can measure what happens when someone touches something hot. Nerves send signals. Brain regions become active, the person pulls their hand away. But why does that electrical activity create the experience we call pain? That question isn't completely solved. And that creates a challenge for future biological computers. Suppose researchers create increasingly complicated neural tissue. At what point would we need to worry about experience? 1,000 neurons? 1,000,000? 1,000,000,000? Does size even determine it? Maybe organization matters more. Maybe specific brain structures are required. Maybe consciousness requires a body. Maybe these cultures could never experience anything at all. We don't know. And history gives us reasons to be careful when deciding whether something else is aware. Researchers studying patients with severe brain injuries have found cases where people who appeared completely unresponsive still showed signs of understanding instructions through brain imaging. Some patients couldn't move, they couldn't speak, they couldn't physically show researchers that they understood, but certain brain scans suggested awareness was still present. That doesn't mean a dish of neurons is secretly conscious. Those are completely different situations, but it teaches an important lesson. Awareness isn't always obvious from the outside. The ethical question. Now imagine this technology 20 years from now. The cultures are larger, the structures are more organized, the interfaces are better. Scientists can communicate with millions or even billions of neurons at once. The biological systems can learn complicated tasks. Maybe they help control robots. Maybe they solve problems. Maybe they become parts of advanced computers. At that point, society could face questions we've never had to answer before. When does living tissue become more than laboratory material? Could a biological computer ever deserve protection? Would scientists need limits on what kinds of signals could be sent into it? Would certain experiments become unethical? How would we even test whether the system could experience discomfort? There might eventually need to be completely new rules for this technology, because traditional computer ethics mostly deals with software. Biological computing introduces something different. The hardware itself is alive. The strangest part, there is something about this story that I can't stop thinking about. Some of these neurons can begin with ordinary human cells. Imagine someone donating a tiny skin sample. Scientists take those cells, they change them, they grow neurons. Those neurons are connected to electrodes. Electrical signals begin moving through them. A computer starts communicating with them. Then researchers train the network. The cells begin changing their responses. The system begins learning. The person who donated those original cells could be somewhere else living a completely normal life. Meanwhile, cells carrying that person's DNA are sitting inside a laboratory connected to a machine. That doesn't mean a piece of that person's personality is inside the dish. It doesn't mean their memories were transferred. It doesn't mean there is another version of them inside the computer. But biologically, those cells came from them. And that alone makes the technology feel different from normal computing. For decades, science fiction imagined humans becoming machines. People worried about computers being implanted into our brains. But biological computing almost flips that idea around. Instead of putting computers inside humans, we are putting human cells inside computers. Final thought. We're still extremely early. Today's systems are limited. Traditional computers are doing much of the work. Living neurons are only one part of these experimental systems, and there is currently no proof that these cultures are sitting inside laboratories experiencing video games the way humans do. But that's exactly why this moment matters. We're watching the beginning. Pong was simple. Doom is more complicated. Future experiments will almost certainly become more advanced. Researchers will grow better neural structures. Electrode systems will improve. The communication between computers and living cells will become more precise. and eventually someone may connect sophisticated three-dimensional neural tissue to machines in ways that aren't possible today. That could lead to incredible discoveries, new treatments, better disease research, less animal testing, more energy-efficient computing, and maybe entirely new forms of technology. But every improvement could also make one question harder to ignore. At what point does living biological computing become something we have a responsibility toward? Maybe the answer is never. Maybe these cells will always remain biological processors without awareness. But if there ever is a line, we need to understand where that line is before we cross it. Because the most important question might not be whether scientists can build a computer using living human neurons. They're already beginning to do that. The question is, what happens when those neurons become much more capable? Today we're watching cells respond to simple video games. Tomorrow they could be doing something completely different. And if the technology keeps advancing, we may eventually have to answer a question that used to belong only in science fiction. When a computer is partly alive, is it still just a computer?